City Limits is a progressive publication, so that means that in our hearts we agree with just about everything Bill de Blasio stands for, and in our heads we are skeptical of everything he does. We also were founded, so that puts me, I think, in a good position to be here. We were founded in the 1970s in the fiscal crisis mainly as a housing publication, and that's still at the heart of what we focus on in terms of the policies we cover and the problems we investigate. So what I'm talking about tonight, urban ecology, is very much near and dear to sort of our institutional heart. What does urban ecology mean? I was thinking about this earlier today, trying to figure out what I was going to say tonight. And to me, it ties into what is my go-to recommendation for friends who are visiting the city, which is, and I don't know if anybody here has not been there, but it's to take the 7 train out to the Queens Museum of Art and see the panorama of New York City, which is by far the most stunning way you can spend a couple hours. It's a, if you haven't been there, it is a movie theater size room with a scale model of the city showing every single structure. You can even find my modest little Bronx row house there. You can find this building. And you walk around it on this glass-bottomed walkway. And it's truly stunning. And even if you've been a student of the city for most of your adult life, which is the case for me, and if you've been all over the city since you were a teenager, which is true for, I'm sure, many of us, you really get a sense there of a few things. The city's vastness, the diversity of uses, the fact that it stretches from, the fishing communities of City Island to the dense office districts of Manhattan, from, mansions in Douglaston to, public housing concentrations in Brownsville. You get a sense of how the infrastructure stitches together what is really just a chain of islands. It seems to us like a pretty seamless thing sometimes, but you really get a sense in that 3D environment of how all that pulls it together. And you see also how the man-made or human-made world interacts with the natural one, which we often don't realize. We have a vast city of 8 million people, 323 square miles of land, surrounded by water with salt marshes and beaches and forests in the interior. So you really get a sense of how all that comes together to be the city. And what you realize is that among the things we'll be talking about tonight in terms of all the impacts a mayor can have on how the city operates, its character, who's going to be welcome to live there, its culture, the mayor's shaping of the physical city is a critical part of his or her job. For a couple obvious reasons. One is that land is the ultimate, non-renewable finite resource, right? I mean, you can build up, which we do in New York, and you can, take the stuff you dig out to build up and fill in and create land like in Battery Park City. But there is a limit to how much you can create land. There's only so much of it. And that's true everywhere. But in New York City, the intensity of competition for resources is so great that it really makes the political challenge of managing land that much greater. It also means, the physical city means, that this aspect of the mayor's legacy has a certain permanence to it, that others don't. We'll long think about the echo of Mayor Bloomberg's stop and frisk and the testing in the schools and the whatever else, but that could go away and be a thing of memory. It's going to be a long time before the buildings that we see along the Brooklyn waterfront ever go away, whether they should or shouldn't. So those are true for every mayor. I think for a progressive mayor, the land use ecology questions are even more interesting because of that competition for resources. Mayor de Blasio was not elected on a tide of progressive hope. He was elected on a tide of progressive hopes. A lot of different groups that had shared a sense that we needed change in the city, but had very different ideas of what that change should look like. You have people who want affordable housing, and you have folks who would emphasize industrial development. You have folks who are interested in, environmental sustainability, and others who want to see, job-creating infrastructure projects that may or may not tie in with that. So he has to square all of that. He also has to figure out a process that is itself progressive. Because as anybody who's been to a community board meeting or been through a land use discussion in New York City knows, it's not just about the end product, it's about the process to get there. Is there a progressive way to do infrastructure, land use planning in the city and still get a progressive outcome? That's, I think, a very real question. In addition, Mayor Bloomberg is the first mayor to really have to deal with these issues, with climate change being a known and present danger. It's hard to realize that, at the beginning of Mayor Bloomberg's time in office, we knew this was happening. We knew it was going to happen someday. But it really wasn't until Sandy occurred that folks, I think, grasped just how present the threat is. And so, since we're an island, city of islands, that threat from the sea is a very big part of land use decisions. And also, Mayor Bloomberg, as a political animal, which all politicians are, comes from a background having a lot of support in organized labor, and also having good relations with the development community, two spheres of the city who have a very particular ideas and needs about land use, which will color, I think, how his actions are perceived. So how is he doing so far? And there's a lot we could talk about, a lot more than I have time to say. You could talk about the policies on homelessness, which is a land use issue to some degree, on NYCHA, on manufacturing support. And we can talk about that as the evening goes on. On Sandy rebuilding, I think, we could have a whole conference on that. Let me focus on just two areas that I think are probably the most critical. One is the question about environmental sustainability. De Blasio has gotten a reputation for having neglected that issue to this point. And I think that reputation is unfair. The mayor actually has done a bit on environmental sustainability. He has updated the city's pollution control code, or he's attempted to. The council's having hearings on that now. He's expanded a carbon challenge program. He's done stuff with low-flow toilets. He's done stuff with the Blue Belt, solar power. He's introduced some new building efficiency codes. I'm told that there'll be some big announcement coming during Climate Week later in the month. I'm not sure exactly what that is. And so I think compared certainly to the first 6 months of the Bloomberg administration, and remember Plan YC didn't come until I think early 2007, he's done pretty well. It's true that he has not introduced a new head of the Office of Long-Term Sustainability and Long-Term Planning and Sustainability, and that's a problem. He also has not done a major speech on environmental issues, and people often jump on that too. And I think that creates a problem of perception, because people in the media, like me, we have to reduce the incredible complexity of a mayor's time in office to some easily understandable themes. And so the theme now is that de Blasio is about inequality and housing, and that the environmental stuff is being pushed aside. I don't think that's quite true, but the fact that he has not emphasized what he's done to this point, I think lends itself to that interpretation. City Hall is very sensitive, I think, about that claim, and I think you'll be seeing in coming weeks and months an effort to rebut it. But affordable housing is clearly the big kahuna. It obviously affects all the other land use issues. As someone was telling me in February during the fight over UPK is nothing compared to trying to create 200,000 units of affordable housing, or preserve 200,000 units of affordable housing over 10 years. The mayor's plan that came out in, I think that was late April, is remarkably detailed, and it is a map for where he wants to go, but it's not an itinerary. Now, what's the difference? The mayor has made clear in that plan that he wants a denser, more equitable city, and he's laid out a number of ways that the city's going to get there. From talking about land banks to cleaning up brownfields to adjusting how tax credits are used. Dozens and dozens of policy tweaks to gain or preserve a few units here or there. But the big issue, obviously, is going to be trying to get some bulk in the production of this housing, and that is where the mandatory inclusionary zoning policy will come in, and the question of trying to create more density in at least 15 different city neighborhoods. Now, as we know from past battles, density is not always a popular thing, and exactly how that's going to look neighborhood to neighborhood, the mayor's plan is very quiet on. And I think that in part reflects that they want to have a grassroots, a ground-up process where they go to a neighborhood and say, we want to encourage some more density here. What other infrastructure can we bring in to make that make sense? I honestly think that's what they're trying to do. But having that process and having that approach means there is no plan now that we can say, okay, this is how it's going to look. Like we could at the beginning of the Bloomberg plan. And so I think that means that, a lot of this discussion really can't be had until a few years from now, when we see what the affordable housing plan looks like, where it goes, how much density they achieve, and what those political battles look like. And so I'll close on this note, which is that from the outset of the administration, given the promises that de Blasio made, some of us have asked questions about how his impact on inequality could be measured, because inequality can be kind of a nebulous thing to pin down. And I think on the housing issues, it's not just a question of how we'll measure it, but when. And at what point we'll be able to say whether or not the plan was successful in achieving the kind of city, the denser, more equitable place that de Blasio has talked about. Because remember, the last big plan before Bloomberg's was the Koch 10-year plan, and that really didn't get built out until I think the end of the Dinkins, maybe early Giuliani administration. So it'll be a while before we'll be able to say, with any definition, exactly how the de Blasio approach to urban ecology, whether it's sustainability or affordable housing or any of the myriad other things that are in the panorama in Queens, how that all looks like. But I think that's the picture so far. Thank you.